Greetings! In today's video, I'll be taking a look at this really unique gift box set from Winsor & Newton, and I have these two extras and I'll explain why these are there once we take a look at what's inside this beautiful box. First of all, the box is really nice. You can see it has this mirror-like print on the top, and it's really interesting the way it's made. I don't know if you can see, but it has this little part of the cardboard that goes further, and it works as a handle, so you can open the box by lifting, like grabbing onto this and lifting it. And inside, this is what we get inside. So we have a bottle of black Indian ink from Winsor & Newton ink. This is what it looks like. Black ink, really. Then we have 3 Cotman colors. So the set comes with a lemon yellow hue, so that's our pigment PY175, which usually makes for a really nice neutral yellow. Then we have a tube of permanent rose, which is our pigment PV19, often makes a really nice magenta color. And then we have a tube of ultramarine, PB29, which doesn't really make for a good cyan color. This is less of a neutral color, this is more of a warm blue as it leans towards the red. So that's why I have these two extras here. From the same range, I have intense blue, phthalo blue, and cerulean blue hue. The intense blue is PB15, and the cerulean blue hue is also PB15. What we have left in this set. So we have a collapsible portable brush, a water brush. It's their design where it goes like this, up, and then when you're done, you empty it out and you put it back in like that. We also have a Cotman brush, a round in size 2, which is quite a small brush. We have a mixing palette that looks good, but fortunately is still plastic. Seems to be decently sturdy plastic. It would have been fun to get a palette meant to be a bit more long-lasting than this one seems to be, because it seems to be a bit flimsy. And then, I think, if we lift this up, we have some papers. Alright, so postcards. So I guess that's it for this set. I think this is meant to be a sort of introductory set to watercolor. I feel like in that aspect it looks good, looks really nice. It's great to have the ink and the triad of paints. It's good to have the triad of paints that's at least 2/3 of the way there. I'll set some swatching up, some mixing wheels. We'll be able to see everything. And you might not be able to find this set, I understand that. But the supplies themselves, like the Cotman tubes and the ink, they're easy to find. You should be able to find these just about anywhere. I feel like it's quite easy to put a similar little set together on your own and to use it and have fun. But yeah, first of all, let's do all the testing and all the painting, and then we'll see. And I am back with my little tests and my impressions of this particular set. So as you can see in my sketchbook, on the left side I have 3 color wheels, and at the bottom of the color wheels I have swatches of the colors that are in the color wheel. It's pretty simple. All 3 of them have the same mixes between the magenta and the yellow, because those are the colors that didn't change from one to another. The blues are the colors that changed, so the mixes between magenta and blue then blue and yellow are what will ultimately make a difference. For the very first wheel, I have the yellow, the magenta, and ultramarine. So these are the 3 colors that came with the set. The rose is PV19, the yellow is PY175, and ultramarine blue is PB29. The blue in this case makes a really big difference on what you can mix with these colors or not. If you look at my mixing wheel, you can see that the purples I have between the magenta and the blue are really nice. They have a good intensity, a nice saturation, they look like purple, they're not muted, they come out quite strongly. In this case, as ultramarine blue is what we refer to as a warm blue, it mixes really well with the magenta to create purples. A warm blue will lean a bit more towards the red, so if you mix that with a magenta, you get really nice purples. Everything works together. However, what makes those purples look so good is also what will make the greens look a whole lot more muted. You can absolutely mix a green with the yellow and ultramarine blue, but now this warm quality of the ultramarine blue plays against the greens and it makes for much more muted greens. They're beautiful, they're really, really nice, but you wouldn't be able to get a vibrant lime green or a leaf green or a vibrant grass green with these two colors. It's just not possible. Cotman's version of this pigment is not very drastic in its granulation, but still, in some mixes, you can still get a bit of that granulation from the ultramarine blue, which is something you won't get with the other blues I showcase later on. My second wheel has one of the blues that I decided to add to the set with the intent of showcasing the difference in mixing between using the blue that's in the set and using other blues. So this one has permanent rose again, lemon yellow hue again, and this time we have intense blue phthalo blue. Intense blue phthalo blue, as the name implies, is a phthalo blue color. It is pigment PB15. It is a bit more of a neutral blue. In terms of pigment, the phthalo blue pigment has a couple of variations. You can have one that is a bit more warm, which is often labeled red shade, and you have one that's a bit more cool, often labeled green shade or yellow shade. In this case, there is no particular labeling that would indicate which version it is, but it seems to be fairly neutral in terms of phthalo blue pigments. Looking at the mixes here, you can see something very different from the mixes before. There is a whole lot more versatility to this intense blue than we had with ultramarine. If you look at the purples, they're quite similar. They're not the same, but they're similar. You don't see such a drastic difference between the purples of the first wheel and the purples of the second wheel. However, when we get to the green colors, now you see a really big difference. This blue being a bit more neutral, it plays better with the yellow. So you don't end up with muted greens, you end up with those nice vibrant greens. This makes for a slightly more versatile color selection because what you can get from the three base colors is less limited. And finally, the last color wheel. There's really not that much to say about this one. It is very similar to the previous one. The only difference is that the cerulean blue hue color that I use in this one, same pigment as the intense blue, but the resulting color is much weaker if you compare them. It's still that kind of cyan neutral blue hue, but weaker. And as such, the mixes you make with it will end up being weaker as well. You don't get that depth of value that you had with the intense blue, so whatever you mix with the cerulean blue is always going to be of a lighter value. And now that we've gone through all of these, I want to take a moment to just ramble a little bit about primary colors. Now, I think that everyone is familiar with the notion of primary colors, in some aspect anyway. The quote-unquote primary color selection that most people have heard of is red, yellow, and blue. Now, I have issues with that personally, okay? It bothers me. I prefer using cyan, magenta, and yellow, and I'll explain why very briefly. From my experience, these three colors are so much more versatile, and they are actually primary colors. For me, primary colors are similar in concept to what prime numbers are. Prime numbers, in a way, are numbers you cannot get anywhere else but within themselves. They only have two factors, 1 and the number. So you cannot divide it by anything but 1 and the number, and you cannot multiply anything to get to it except 1 and the number. I hope that makes sense. I am not a math person. So when it comes to colors though, what I would like to consider a primary color to be is a color that you cannot get from mixing, that the only way to get the color would be from the pure color or taking that same color and diluting it with water. So what would basically be the two factors of primary colors. In this context, still, you cannot mix yellow. I think we can all agree. You cannot mix anything that will give you yellow, but perhaps other yellows. Same with magenta. Magenta is one of those colors you cannot get from red. You cannot get from diluting a red. You might get a bit of a salmon pink color, but you will never get a magenta. And then same for cyan, or in this case, our phthalo blue. You cannot get this cyan color from mixing blue with something else. It's not gonna work. So that would make the most versatile colors, the primary colors, cyan, magenta, and yellow. The issue with red and blue is that you can get red and blue from mixing. You can get red by mixing a magenta with a bit of yellow, and you can get blue by mixing a magenta with a little bit of a cyan. So you can find those colors within cyan, magenta, and yellow, but you cannot get magenta and cyan from red, yellow, and blue. I hope that makes sense. It's something that I don't know why, but I'm really particular about. I don't think it's doing any service to people who are learning to use paints to give them red, blue, and yellow, and to tell them to paint whatever they want. Now, this set almost has it with the yellow, the magenta, and then they went for ultramarine when they already have a really decent cyan color within the range. It would have been a much more versatile and less infuriating color to include in this set, which I take to assume that it's a kind of a starter set. Now, just before I quickly close this parenthesis, you can use any trio of colors you want to paint your image. Any kind of quote-unquote triad of colors you want to use to paint your image, and you want to label these the primary colors of your image, fine. I have zero issues with that. But I get really bothered when you are giving a blue or a red to someone in a kind of a starter set. A ramble over. I could ramble about this stuff forever, but I'm gonna finish this review of this set, and then if we want to have a specific video of color rambling, that can be something. But for now, the set. So yeah, like I was mentioning, within the Cotman range, they have this amazing neutral blue in their intense blue. It is one of their best colors. I am not a huge fan of the Cotman range. The colors are very uneven, and that comes as a result of trying to make them all the same price. Because if you look at the Cotman paints, they're all the same price. Every tube is the same price, regardless of color. And that's a good thing for them. Considering it's a budget or a beginner's range, that's really cool that they've made every color the same. The result of that, though, is that the quality is not the same throughout all the colors. And in this case, with this set, I really cannot fathom why they would put ultramarine blue instead of intense blue. It's the same price, but it works so much better as a mixer than ultramarine blue. The set doesn't come with any kind of instruction on how to use the supplies. Perhaps if it did, I would be less annoyed by this. But if you just give someone 3 colors, a bottle of ink, a few supplies, and you tell them to just wing it, they might get really frustrated. If we were to extend this color selection, instead of having a primary triad, we make it a split primary hexad, 6 colors. Now, I think ultramarine would fit really nicely in there. You could add a warm yellow, a red, ultramarine, and then our cyan, magenta, and yellow, and that would be a really nice selection of colors. It would work really well. You would get some really good mixes from these 6 colors. But if we trim it down to just 3, ultramarine has to go. Also, quickly, to mention the cerulean blue hue, why I haven't really talked about it. It is a nice light cyan color, but like I said, it's much weaker. So I feel like if you need a more neutral blue for this selection, the intense blue is the obvious choice. So the cerulean can work, but it's, you know, it's just a bit meh. I've focused a lot on the color selection. It is my main issue with this set, but I'll also go through the other supplies. I have a couple of nitpicks here and there, nothing as major as the color selection in my opinion, but still, I'll go through my impressions of the other items that I've tried, starting with the ink. The ink appears to be mostly waterproof. On watercolor paper, it reactivates just a little bit, creates this light gray film. That's not really what I like about waterproof inks. It's a bit tricky at the same time because watercolor paper, with its sizing, I think sometimes it interferes with the waterproofness of some inks. I've had this issue with other inks, other pens, where something that tests perfectly waterproof, if you put it on watercolor paper, you can still manage to pick up some of the ink anyway, even when it's dry. This is why testing your ink on a piece of scrap watercolor paper is always a good idea. But yeah, so it reactivates just the tiniest bit. So what I decided to do for my drawing, I decided that I would paint everything and then ink on top of the paint. And that seems to have worked fine. There really was not any issue with that. The ink works well, it's smooth, it has a good opacity, it seems to be relatively strong, and it has a slight lean towards a warm black if you look at the swatch I made with the dilution. But overall, it's nice and strong and you don't really see through it all that much. You gotta keep in mind that it's shellac based. That's a very particular kind of binding agent and it can mess up your brush. It can be weird if you mix water with it. So you have to perhaps be a bit careful, and if you really want to get into it and experiment, you perhaps have to research a bit what shellac does to ink. It is not something I'm familiar with, so apologies. The Cotman brush is really nice. I really like Cotman brushes. I feel like they're really good synthetic brushes. They keep a good shape, they're relatively affordable, and they are really reliable. Now, I don't know if in the context of this set, the size 2 brush was intended for inking, but seeing as it's a size 2, it's really small. And for my personal usage, I wouldn't want to use that to paint a full drawing. So I opted to use it for inking, and for painting my drawing, I took out some of my other brushes, my regular brushes. The paints themselves in terms of quality are decent. They're not all equal. I've mentioned this a bit. The intense blue is really nice. The ultramarine blue is nice. The permanent rose is okay. The yellow and the cerulean bother me a bit. They have this really odd property that when wet, they feel to me like they get milky. It's really difficult to explain. It's as if when you re-wet the paint and work it with some water, it always looks like the mix becomes more white. And then when you paint with it and the paint dries on the paper, I feel like this white film gets transparent again. I noticed it a lot when I was doing the mixes for the color wheels, because some mixes I was like, oh, this mix looks really weak. It doesn't have the value and the depth that I thought it was gonna have. And then I put it on the paper and it dries and it kind of looks better than I remembered. So there's something going on here. It doesn't do that with all the colors, like I've said. Within this selection, I feel like the yellow and the cerulean have that issue a lot. And some colors like the intense blue and the ultramarine don't seem to have that issue at all. The Cotman range being what it is, I always get the feeling that some of the colors end up having more binder or perhaps a bit more filler in them than others would. I don't know for sure, but it's the feeling I get from them when I reference my experience and my usage of other paints. I don't have much to say about the water brush. I don't really use them, and as a result of that, I have a very limited experience to evaluate them. If someone has a bit more experience with this brush, I would be really curious to read that in the comments, so feel free to share. The tray that comes with the set is okay. It is flimsy and it is very lightweight, so it tends to move around a lot when you try to paint. I had to tape mine down or to wedge it between other things so it would stay put, and also it doesn't have a lot of space for mixing. Mind you, I added 2 other colors to this set that weren't there, but still, if you just use these 3 paints, you still kind of have just 3 wells for mixing. And since the wells are slanted, it's a bit difficult to optimize the space you get for mixing. For my own painting, my own setup, I ended up using a separate little dish to mix colors, but yeah. The postcards that come with this set are interesting, but you only get 5 or 6. They are rather small, and since you only get so few and you have sort of nothing else in this set, I would worry that they would feel precious to whoever would go into this set as a beginner, and you kind of don't want to waste them. So it's not really conducive to experimenting with the colors and the paints and the ink, and if you want to do some mixes or if you want to try some things, you kind of don't have any spare paper or scraps to do that. I like that there's info on the postcards regarding the weight of the paper, but you don't get info on the fiber content, so I don't know if these are cellulose, cotton, or a mix. And the very last little thing, my painting. It went okay. I feel like Cotman paints re-wet and lift really easily, so it made layering weird and difficult. I like to work in layers to really get the hues that I want and the depth that I want. So I was not really able to do that on this little painting. I was able to do kind of the semi-dry brush scribbling I do to add texture to things, but layering, it was really stressful in a way because you kind of have to go really quick and you have to be really light with your touch on the brush so that you don't reactivate everything and then lift it. Also, with only the 3 colors that come with the set, you gotta do a lot of mixing if you you want to paint anything specific. I do illustrations, but let's say you want to paint some still life of flowers, or you want to go outside and paint the scenery. You're going to have to do a lot of mixing, and it can get a bit annoying after a while because it is very repetitive. And the colors that come with the set, chances are that you won't use them just straight from the pan. You'll have to mix something from them to get the color that you want. On one end, it's really interesting to learn about color mixing, like as a general concept. If you only have 3 colors, then you kind of have to figure it out by mixing. The downside of that is mostly from having ultramarine blue in this set and the limits that it sets you up for when it comes to mixing colors. The Cotman quality is annoying from it being so uneven and lifting so easily, but it might work better for some people. It just wasn't a good match for me personally. It's just not my cup of tea. Overall, I don't really recommend this specific set. I really like the idea. I think it has a lot of potential, but at the same time, the items in this set, there's enough flaws to make this not worth it, in my opinion. I feel like it wouldn't be very hard to put together a beginner set that has very similar supplies, but that also corrects the flaws that this set has. Out of all the items in this set, I would definitely recommend the Cotman brushes. I love them. And also, the Intense Blue is a really good budget or beginner-friendly neutral-ish blue. I really like it. I think it's nice. It's one of their best colors, and the fact that it's so affordable might make this a really good pick for someone starting in watercolor. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with me or do you disagree with me? Do you have a different experience with Cotman paints or the ink or these supplies? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments, so feel free to let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I really appreciate it, and we will see each other in the next one. Bye bye!